Now we're going to go over importing files from outside of After Effects. We're going to work with a Photoshop project that has layers, and I'm going to go through the different types of importing that we can do in After Effects here. So working with files intended to be taken into After Effects, you should keep several things in mind. You should always work with a screen resolution of 72 pixels per inch, and you should try to keep your pixel dimensions within 2,000 or so dimensions when working with raster or bitmap images. Vector images, not such a big deal because they're vector information based on math, and they can you can handle pretty large file sizes in After Effects that way. So the project that I'm going to import is something that I created in Photoshop with the intention to take to After Effects, and it's a screen resolution that satisfies the requirements for the NTSC DV widescreen square pixel, which is a preset in Photoshop. When you choose File, New, you'll see the different pull-down menus for different types of output. And one of them is TV and video, and you'll find that there's a preset that matches After Effects in its composition settings. So to import a file, you can do this several ways. You can go to File, Import, and here you'll see File, Multiple Files, and some other things that you can import here as well. You can also Control-click in the project window in an empty area or on a folder, and there's Import. Same elements that you saw up in the File menu. Or you can also just double-click in an empty space in the project window, and that'll open up the Import Files window. So I'm just going to stay standard here. I'm going to go to File, Import Files. Oh, and then there's, of course, Command-I. 4 ways to import. Why don't they give us some more? All right, so you end up having a look at your import window, which is, looks a lot like your Finder, and you just have to navigate to an area where your files exist. Mine are on my desktop for this little exercise here. There are many acceptable formats that you can import into After Effects for visual or audio purposes. For a complete list of that, you could just go to the After Effects Help menu, and it'll show you if you type in the keyword import. Alright, so I have a robot file that I made in Photoshop. Let's make this window a little bigger. Okay. And the robot consists of layers. It has a background plate, and then I broke the robot into a head layer, a torso layer, a layer for each arm, and a layer for each leg. So that's a total of 7 layers. When you select a file in After Effects, you are given the ability to decide how you would like to import it. So here's this option called Import As, and by default it may be set to footage. Footage is going to treat whatever it is that you're importing as a single layer. And it'll give you some options too. So if you're just importing a simple photograph, just a JPEG, that you're going to use in your project, footage is all you need to have it set to. If you're importing a QuickTime movie that you're going to be using in your project, footage is the setting that you want. So this being set to footage, when I hit open, I get another window that says, alright, let's talk about this again in detail. You chose the import kind setting of footage. what would you like to do with your layers? Because it says, all right, you've got layers. What do you want us to do with those layers? The first option is to choose merged layers. Now I'm just going to do that for now because I'm going to walk you through all the different types of importing. So merged layers, if I choose OK, brings into my project bin a file that has just one layer, and it's all of those layers merged together. So it's a flattened representation of a layered Photoshop file. If I was to create a new comp that was my NTSC D1 widescreen square pixel, I'll call this footage. Flattened. Footage flattened. Oh, merged. I should just stick with the term that we're looking at. Merged. Okay. Now here's a composition, and I would like to get my robot into this comp. And this is the process that you'll be going through pretty much for all your work here on out in After Effects. There are some other ways that we'll get into, but this is it. You make a composition. You're basically creating a home for the work that you're going to be creating. So I'm going to take my robot flattened file, the merged footage, and I'm just going to drag it down into my timeline. So you can drag it down into the timeline in this area here. I'll hit undo. Or you could drag it into your composition window, and you can see it's kind of snapping magnetically to edges and center, and that gives me the same result. Alright, so here is a single layer inside a composition that I made of this robot. I'm just going to, well, I'll just import again. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to import again. I'm going to show you a different kind of footage import. So File, Import, File. I'm going to choose my robot. I'm going to leave it as footage. I'm going to choose Open. And this time, under my layer options, instead of saying merged, I'll set it to choose layer. And now it says to me, I identified that your Photoshop file has all of these current layers in it. Which one would you like? So I could just leave it at head. And it's asking me here as well, would you like to merge layer styles in the footage or ignore them? Layer styles are things like drop shadows, bevels and embosses, strokes, that sort of a thing that you can do in Photoshop. You can do all of those layer styles in After Effects. Or you could choose to merge them into the footage, and that will just kind of flatten them down and group them together. The final thing to identify here is document size or layer size. And my document size is the size of the Photoshop file that I had created, which was that widescreen square pixel format of 876 by 4 whatever, I can't remember the dimensions offhand. That's the document size. However, the head is much smaller than my document, and I could choose to have its dimensions be based on the dimensions of just the head. And there are reasons why you would do either one. And I'll talk about those in a little bit. I'm just going to leave this for now on document size because we'll import it again as layer size just so we can see the difference. We'll choose OK. Now I'm going to create another new comp, and I'll call this footage single and doc for document dimensions. I'll do doc dim. Alright, so here's a new comp that I made. Now if I look at my project window, I have the robot PSD, which was the merged flattened file, and now I have a second piece of footage up here which identifies the layer from what document it came from. So I have the head from robot.psd. This head, if I drag this into my composition, you'll see that it brought in just the head of my robot, and that the bounding box, the dimensions of this layer, are that of the dimensions of the document, which is 872 by 486. How do I all of a sudden know that? I'm looking up in my project window where it tells me all the information about my footage, which is currently selected. It's a great thing to keep your eye on. Okay, so I have an anchor point that is in the center of my document, and I have the artwork of this guy. And for the sake of like animating this robot, I would never want to bring in a file this way. I'd want to have the head bounding box constrained to the edges of the head. It would make animating so much easier. So now I'm going to show you how I would do that. So if I choose File, Import, File, and I choose the robot, leave it as footage, hit Open, and I go Choose Layer, and I do head again, but this time change footage dimensions to layer size, and I choose OK. Now I have another layer called head from robot that if I were to create a new comp, this is footage what did I name the last one? Footage layer? I don't know. Can't remember. That's terrible. Layer layer dimensions. There we go. Hey, why didn't that go caps? Layer dim. All right. Good. What did I call the last one? Single. Okay. Fine. Still works. Not too far off track. All right, so I'm going to grab the new imported layer of the head and drag that into my composition. And now you can see here's the difference. My bounding box is kept to the dimensions of that layer's properties. You know, that layer itself is 102 pixels across by 132 pixels tall. And that's the bounding box that I have. And now the anchor point is in the center of that dimension of the head, which would be much more manageable for me to use. So here's the document dimensions head and the result of that being imported and brought into a composition versus the footage imported as layer dimensions. And so that just gives you all one layer at a time, which really kind of defeats the purpose of creating a nice layered document in Photoshop. So that takes me to the other ways in which you will import. Real quickly, I'm going to organize my project. I'm going to add a folder, and I'm going to source files. I'm just going to grab these layers I imported and stick them in there. In fact, if I really wanted to be even more organized, I'll add another, and I'll call this footage, and put them in the footage folder, because I am going to import a different type of document now. Same document, but just under a different setting. So import the robot. This time change import as to composition. Well, let's just look at the options. Composition or retain layer sizes. Starting hopefully if you just followed me, you can figure out what the difference is between these two. I'm going to choose composition and I'm going to hit open. It's going to remind me again, okay, you chose composition. What do you want to do with layer styles? I don't have any, so it doesn't matter. I'm just going to choose OK. And now I have a different looking import set up in my project window. What I have now is a composition called Robot and a folder called Robot Layers. And if I open that up, here are all the layers that were in that Photoshop document. sort of nested in this folder. So the result of importing a file as composition gives you two things. A composition, because you said import as composition, right? Yes. And so you get a composition and the folder that contains all the layers that made up that that Photoshop file. So if I were to double click and open up the composition called Robot that came with that, now I get everything just the way I intended it from Photoshop. It looks similar to the footage merged comp, but there's just one layer there, one flat layer. I can't grab an arm and move it. I can't move the guy's head or anything. But the composition came in imported with every element as its own layer. So now I could turn off the visibility for just the head or just the torso. Ooh, don't you love the robot's hands? So creepily human-like. All right, so notice that the boundaries of each layer are exactly the same. That's because I just chose import as composition, which is going to give every layer the dimension, the bounding box of the document's dimensions, which again is 872 by 486. I made that in Photoshop. This isn't very good for a project like this, where I want to get my hands on just the arms, just the legs, just the head. So that's where the final import style or setting comes in, of choosing the robot, import as composition, and retain layer sizes. So when I choose this and hit open, just yeah, whatever, again I get two elements out of this import, a composition and a folder that consists of the layers. So it's very similar to what the first approach of importing as composition gave me, only the difference now is going to be if I open up robot. Here, I should rename these. To rename anything, you just hit return. We'll go over that in the next exercise for the Air Miles project. So this is going to be robot. I'll do doc dim again, and this one is going to be robot layer dim. Look at how crazy this is already getting. My project window is having, a lot of comps and a lot of folders. This is when I like to get organized and say, let's take all these folders of the robot layers, put them in my source files folder. So that's tidying up a little bit. And then just naming your comps is a huge help. All right, so now I'm going to open up robot layer dimensions. And here's the same thing. It looks the same as the one that was just straight up composition, only now if I select the head, the document boundaries are only around the head. If I select the torso, it's only around the torso, left arm, right arm, which is going to make managing these layers far less of a headache than having to go deal with every layer having a huge bounding box that's the same size as the comp, which keeps you from being able to do things like this. Just go ahead and click on the part that you want to move. So right now I'm in the composition window, just going along and selecting the head, and it selects itself, select the arm, and it selects itself. If that were in this imported as composition comp, I could not select my head or my arm or my torso or legs individually, because it's going to just, the head's going to get in the way the whole time. So that's just one benefit right there, just to be able to go click and you've got it. All right, so that's importing different types of footage and compositions, and that's where we'll call it good here.